festive amateur hour as a flock of females and Pluck a Duck come out to play in the final qualifying for the Holden Calibra Celebrity Race. And this weekend, one of those sensational Calibras plus $5,000 could be yours in our special Grand Prix Memorable Moments giveaway. So climb into your racing suit, strap that helmet on tight as we go driving with all the images, all the magic, and all the unforgettable moments of the Australian Formula One Grand Prix weekend. Right here on the one and only Wide World of Sports.
Hello and welcome to Sensational Adelaide for the 10th anniversary of the Australian Formula One Grand Prix. And once again, it's a joy and a pleasure to welcome the company of 3-time world champion Jackie Stewart. And the weather's going to have a big part in what happens here today.
Well, it sure is. I mean, looking behind, you can see that there's rain on our screen, and it's been sprinkling all morning. That's going to have a big effect on what's going to occur this afternoon, particularly after such an exciting day yesterday. The weather here, in fact, is showing that it's going to be occasionally showery. It will be mostly cloudy all day with a maximum of 22 degrees. So I think that's going to have a big play on this afternoon. Now, to call the action here in Adelaide, we've assembled an all-star team headed by the voice of Grand Prix Formula One racing, the one and only Murray Walker.
Thanks, Jackie. Great to be back in Adelaide for the 10th time for the Australian Grand Prix, which is going to climax the World Championship for the first time since 1986. Your commentary team, myself, Jonathan Palmer, Alan Jones, ex-Grand Prix driver Jonathan Palmer, new to the team, so welcome aboard, JP.
Thank you very much, Murray. Great to be back here in Adelaide. I've been here some 5 times before, each time driving, with the best ever result, in fact, here in my Grand Prix career of 4th. This time, though, back with a microphone, having fun, commentating on what we're going to be watching, and joining me will be Alan Jones.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, your first time here as a commentator, but you certainly couldn't get a very much better one because it's going to decide the World Championship. The weather is changing, good old Adelaide again, and it's certainly going to put the cat amongst the pigeons as regards results.
Yeah, it's all going to be happening, so join us.
Thanks, Murray. And for their assessment of the Grand Prix weekend, let's join Barry Sheen and Big Darryl Eastlake.
Adelaide's sensational, 10 years down the track. Baz, here we go again. Well, the old weather, she's a bit iffy, and that seems to happen in Adelaide. You put a motor race on, and it's going to rain. But there's a war of nerves going on around this track, and you've been right in the heat of the battle.
Well, there definitely is, Daz. You know, when you only have to look at the face of Michael Schumacher and the face of Damon Hill, and I'd hate to be in their position. You know, they're obviously stressed. You saw yesterday in the qualifying, Schumacher was quickest, and then Mansell went out and stuck in a really good one. Schumacher went straight out after, put in a reasonable lap, and then had a real good go, run over the curves, and we all saw the result. As far as Damon's concerned, you know, you can see his face is pretty stressed out. And this morning in the free practice, he did 6 laps, and the back end of the car locked up, and he stuck it into the wall. So, you know, all you can say is it's definite battle of nerves, and let's hope all the aggravations are out of the way. But I tell you what, if Schumacher and Nigel are on the front row of the grid, it's going to be real fun going into the first chicane.
No doubt about that. Of course, Barry will be in the pits too. Now, of course, it's a full race program. We've got the big V8s. They always are sensational around here. So it's a great day's racing. Kenny.
Nicely done. Back in Adelaide on a very overcast day, but we're looking forward to some tremendous racing right throughout the weekend. Throughout yesterday and this morning, the Formula One teams have reacquainted themselves with the Adelaide circuit. The fastest qualifying lap on this track was 1 minute 13.371 seconds, set last year by the late Ayrton Senna. Who's on the pace this year? Tim Sheridan has been monitoring the action.
Years after they first made split seconds count on the streets of Adelaide, John Lacey led the drivers out for Friday morning's eye-opener. With a 15-minute break sandwiched between two 45-minute practice sessions, it didn't take long for the first preview of things to come. Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher left the pits less than 2 minutes apart, and by the end of the morning, only 0.14 of a second was between the two contenders for the title. Hill was the quickest, and Mika Hakkinen third behind Schumacher. But lurking just behind them was an old Adelaide hand, Nigel Mansell in fourth, despite a gentle parking effort early in the first session. No times counted for the grid, and as usual, that was just as well for some. Whether it was the future extinction of the Adelaide Grand Prix, or simply the smell of a championship decider, Friday crowd numbers were strong. In qualifying, insects were the lone track occupants with anything to fear from Okayo Katayama, while out the front of the field, the new twist in the championship plot began to unfold.
I think certainly this is the most motivated I've seen Nigel for a long time. I think he really wants to win this race, and my prediction is if it's dry on Sunday, I think this man will win.
Nigel Mansell fine-tuned away some of his 12 laps and then pitted as quickest so far. Then Michael Schumacher had his first try.
His second fastest now, only 68 thousandths of a second slower than Mansell on the provisional pole position, and surely this lap will be quicker.
Absolutely right.
Well, we're almost at the end of it as he goes into paddock turn. That's what he's aiming for on the right. And it looks to me as though there's going to be a Benetton Ford in the hands of Michael Schumacher in provisional pole position with 25 minutes to go. In just a few seconds' time, is the answer yes? The answer is yes. Michael Schumacher moves up into provisional pole position.
The German pushed to consolidate on the next lap, but went too hard.
He'll manage to eclipse that 16.1. Oh no, that was a big moment there. Just shows you how hard he's trying, but the car got very sideways.
He was then attacked by the second Williams of Damon Hill.
His 10th, so he's only got 3 laps, including his come-in lap to go. This lap has got to be the quick one. I saw somebody going round the left-hander there in front of him. Is he going to look like a Ferrari to me? Is he going to bulk Damon Hill as he comes up to Stag Turn? It's Gerhard Berger's Ferrari, actually. Now, there's the Markets turn. Well, David's got a good opportunity to get past the Ferrari, and another car in front of it. This is very bad news indeed for Damon Hill as he comes down to the hairpin.
Actually, it could be good news, because if he does it right, he might even just get a toe and be able to get through, a little bit of toe pull out. Now, let's hope that Berger doesn't hold him up through the important parts of his straight.
Well, 0.6 of a second off on that split is going to be very difficult.
With Hill unhappy with his car and unable to put down a consistent lap, Schumacher waited in the pits while Gerhard Berger took to the gravel in a premature end to his hour of qualifying. Meanwhile, Nigel Mansell's 41-year-old reflexes are showing no signs of wear.
On your right, there is Herbert on your left, and let's watch for Mansell coming round. If there's Mansell comes round. In fact, very, very lucky not to hit Herbert, and that's the importance of getting on those brakes, locking it up. There must have been just inches between those cars.
The irony of the parked Benetton wouldn't have been lost on Mansell. If anyone ever wondered why he's the favoured son in the Williams cab, Mansell cleared all that away in one blinding lap.
It was a great save, it really was. I mean, there's nothing wrong with his reflexes, that's for sure. And this is a good lap too, because he came onto the hairpin, onto the start-finish line, as clean as I've seen him done so far. So this will be interesting.
And this is the closing stage of what might be pole position. We'll have to wait and see. Into the hairpin, 3rd gear, 4th gear. Back to 3rd as he comes out of it. Accelerate away. 4th gear, 5th gear. Down to the racetrack hairpin. He's into the Victoria Park racecourse area now. This is the last corner of the lap coming up. You can see how close it is. 1 minute 16.197 is the target. He's Nigel Mansell on pole position. Yes! Nigel Mansell Mansell moves into pole position ahead of Michael Schumacher.
Back on Formula One pace like he'd never left, Mansell is the man to run interference for the Williams team on the dreams of Michael Schumacher. 18 thousandths of a second behind the Englishman, Schumacher came out with a minute or so left.
Hey, look at that's Michael Schumacher. There's no question of Michael Schumacher being in provisional pole now.
And here's the replay here, coming into the centre fence. He hits the curve on the left, and he just loses it on that corner. The back comes around the other way, gets on the grass. He's probably hit that wall at around about 160 k's, I'd say. Big incident, but look at Schumacher. He's safe inside the survival cell chassis there, but all the bits of the car breaking off around him, as indeed they are designed to. But
it was totally out of character for the German, and a stunning first blow for Mansell.
To come around the corner and see the track blocked and take avoiding action and keep the engine going and then do qualify afterwards, yeah, I'm happy. The team did a fantastic job, though.
You've got to say, you haven't seen the replay of that yet, have you?
No, I was there, though. I don't need to see it.
Front row seat.
Change of underpants, I tell you.
So you're obviously happy. Do you think if the weather's the same as this tomorrow, you can go any quicker? Got any left?
I think indicative of this type of course, always quicker the second day, it rubbers in. So, I mean, I think if you want to stay at the front, you've got to go a second to 2 seconds quicker probably tomorrow.
This morning, the faithful answered a deafening wake-up call, and Damon Hill was out early, his view with touches of fire and rain in the dress rehearsal for that 2-second search mentioned by his teammate. But the slippery track was no place for a man coming to terms with his car. It was 45 minutes of desperately needed setup time wasted. The net result, a joy flight now known as Hill's Hoist. The car and its driver are clearly not bonding as they should. And while Michael Schumacher assessed the overnight work of the repair crew, championship party crasher Mansell happily circulated. The morning only became wetter, but that wasn't a worry for Nigel. As provisional pole sitter and quickest this morning, he can swim his way to the front of the grid. His teammate Hill is stuck on the second row and went off for a second time this morning.
Yes, not a good day for young Damon at this particular point in time. Down in the pits, Barry Sheen caught up again with the comeback man, Nigel Mansell.
Nigel, this is getting you ready for, ouch, moving back to the Isle of Man, isn't it, this weather?
If you say so, Barry.
Great help. What do you reckon then?
It's wet at the moment, isn't it? It's got to give him a hard time occasionally. No, it's a bit frustrating. I mean, we went quick this morning, did 16.8, and thought we'd improve the car a little bit. And then, of course, the weather's turned on us all, and it's a little bit frustrating.
So as it stands then, if in the morning warm-up it was raining, then all of a sudden it dried up for the race, are you happy with the setup of the car for the race?
Well, I mean, you've just hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, the biggest problem we've got is guessing what the conditions are going to be, and we've got to compromise. And if it's going to be 50-50, we want to stay with the dry settings. If it's going to rain like this, obviously, then we want to find a wet setting where we can go quicker, because at the moment, I don't think we're competitive in the wet.
As it stands, I was going to ask you that. The comparison between the Benetton and the Williams in the wet, looking at the monitors, the Benetton looks like a little go-car, and with all due respect, the Williams looks a little bit like a bus by comparison.
Well, those are your words, Barry, not mine. Did you hear that? But I mean, what is plain to see is that the Benetton is a lot slower down the straight, which means it's carrying a lot more wing, a lot more drag, and they've got set up on the car for these conditions. I mean, we haven't, and you know, we might be looking this afternoon to try and change the car to see if we can be a bit more competitive. But then if it dries out, then you're in the poo. So, you know, I mean, I'm sort of 50-50, and if I had to choose, I'd still like to be borderlining on the dry setup as opposed to a wet setup.
And the main difference in the rain with the Benetton as against the Williams, it looks like it's a traction.
Yeah, they appear to have very good traction, and I mean, I think that's been indicative of the whole year, and as we know, we get that from suspension. We're working away, but I mean, I really do sincerely hope, Barry, that, you know, tomorrow that the sky's a bit bluer than it is now, and we don't have these problems.
Just like your wonderful eyes, Nigel. Blue and red.
Hey, I got a one-liner, but not for publication for this guy. You caught me yesterday, not today.
He certainly did, and Nigel Mansell really enjoying his weekend here in Adelaide. But, Jackie, there was a lot of aggravation in the Williams garage once Damon had that spin out this morning, and I'm wondering, second-guessing, whether he was asking could he have another car, maybe Nigel's.
Well, it could have been asking that. They do have a spare car, so therefore that may not have been it. But Nigel was certainly interested in hearing, as you witnessed yourself, the words of Damon Hill to the rest of the team. I think Nigel, however, is enormously relaxed, and he must be the most relaxed man here at this Grand Prix of Australia, because the other two players in the big card game are in fact very uptight. Both of them have been off the road, not significantly in the case of Damon Hill, but surely Schumacher, whereas Nigel, it really doesn't matter. He's loose, he's no point standing in the championship, he's in great shape. So I think he's got every right to be relaxed.
And he's doing the job that Frank Williams hired him to do.
Oh, yeah.
Cat amongst the pigeons. In about an hour or so, we'll bring you a live coverage of the crucial shootout for pole position in the final qualifying session. And shortly, we celebrate 10 years of Adelaide. Don't go away. Back in Adelaide, throughout the weekend, we'll be celebrating 10 years of Adelaide's contribution to Grand Prix racing. We'll be remembering the sights, sounds, and all those unforgettable incidents that have made the Australian Grand Prix so special. Jackie?
Of course, Formula One racing is a fiercely expensive and unforgiving sport. Primarily, the objective is to be number one in the victory dais. Victory can turn to disaster in the blink of an eye. Here's a rerun of those winning and losing moments from 10 years of Adelaide.
Some chilling and some glorious moments from Adelaide. And we'll have more of 10 years of Adelaide a little later. Plus, we'll be bringing you live action of today's final qualifying. Keep the motor idling. We'll be back with more in a moment. Haunting pictures back in Adelaide. Season 94 rolled off the grid in Brazil way back in March. Then the big stories were the banning of so-called driver aids and the return of refuelling. But those issues were overtaken by a shocking double tragedy as separate accidents claimed the lives of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger.
While the world mourned, the championship rolled on. Out in front of the pack was the heir apparent, Germany's Michael Schumacher. But an encounter with officialdom cost him valuable points and set up his rivalry with Damon Hill. Alan Jones took this look back at the events of the season 94.
The year started at Interlagos after the usual off-season reshuffles. Ayrton Senna replaced Alain Prost in the Williams team and put it on pole for his home race.
And it is go, and Berger shoots across from the left, and Lacey is going through the middle of Senna and Schumacher, who's passed by Hill. It's Ayrton Senna leading into the Senna S.
The Brazilian led to the first pit stops, with German young gun Michael Schumacher taking over. With fuel stops introduced for 1994, Martin Brundle was the first man to need a top-up. He needn't have bothered, with his challenge ending in a spectacular four-car pile-up, Eddie Irvine causing his first accident of the year.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Oh!
And that was very bad driving from Eddie Irvine there. That is Verstappen. Verstappen rolls and miraculously doesn't land on his head. That is one big accident.
Senna was holding on to second until spinning off with just 14 laps remaining.
That is Senna! Senna! My goodness, Ayrton Senna frantically gesticulating, and that's blown the race for him.
That left Schumacher unchallenged in front, a sight that would become all too familiar as the season unfolded.
His third win in 3 years, and there are a lot more to come of that, I have no doubt.
It was the first ever race held at Ada, Japan, and it took only seconds for the track to claim its first victim.
Yellow flags waving in the background, and straight into the lead goes Schumacher. Olivier Panis has stopped, and a spinner there. That is Senna. Senna, and he's rammed by Larini.
Frank Williams still had Damon Hill to cheer for, but the Englishman was having problems of his own.
Off goes Damon Hill. My goodness, this is not Williams' race.
Leading the way was Schumacher, with no one else even close. Back in the Williams camp, things weren't getting any better.
And out of the race goes Hill.
At least his car was in better shape than those of Alboreto and Wendlinger.
As you see, Alboreto trying to go through on the inside.
There were no mistakes from Schumacher, lapping everyone but runner-up Gerhard Berger. Rubens Barrichello was third to seal the Jordan team's first ever podium finish. It's not surprising Schumacher was in the mood for a champagne bath. His win put him 13 points ahead of Barrichello after just 2 races. As drivers struggled to come to terms with the fast Imola track, accidents were inevitable. Rubens Barrichello was lucky to escape serious injury in this accident in opening qualifying. Worse to come on day 2, with Austria's Roland Ratzenberger not surviving his crash. On race day, Lado stalled on the grid. Lamy couldn't avoid him.
That's a Lotus. They'll have to stop the race, I'm sure, because there's debris on the circuit. That is Pedro Lamy.
1 lap after the restart came the tragedy that sent shockwaves around the world.
And Senna, my goodness, I just saw him plunge off to the right, and Senna has joined Pedro Lamy and J.J. Letter in a shattered motor car. You can see the debris on the right.
After Senna was taken to hospital, officials started the race once more. Gerhard Berger took advantage of a poor start by Schumacher.
And wheel spin from Schumacher's car, which allows Gerhard Berger to go into the lead in the Ferrari.
While everyone hoped the rest of the race would be incident-free, there was more drama to come. A Lotus mechanic seriously injured by a stray tyre from Alboreto's car. Schumacher finally took the points in a race that will go down in history for all the wrong reasons. The deaths of Ratzenberger and Senna are a grim reminder of the dangers involved in a sport better known for its glamour and excitement. We'll present a special tribute to Ayrton Senna during tomorrow's coverage. Although the rich and famous were still out to live it up, it wasn't the usual Monaco mood. Senna had won the race 6 times. It just wasn't the same without him. Alain Prost was among the drivers, past and present, holding a minute's silence for Senna and Ratzenberger. Also missing was Karl Wendlinger, in a coma after an accident in practice. When the event finally got underway, it didn't take long for the first withdrawal.
Berger, and off goes Häkkinen. Häkkinen out of the race.
With Hill and Häkkinen out, Michael Schumacher established a big lead. It soon became obvious the major battle would be for the minor placings. The noise and excitement wasn't to everyone's liking. It diminished slightly with the demise of Eric Bernard. The exits continued with Bertrand Gachot adjourning to the bar. Pedro Lamy decided to battle on after benefiting from a nose job. Schumacher, however, was untroubled, recording the easiest of victories, finishing well ahead of runner-up Martin Brundle. Plenty of pain in Spain for Gerhard Berger, his chances ending early with this cross-country excursion. Damon Hill's pit stop brought out the latest in Spanish television technology, fuel pump cams.
That camera is actually on the fuel filler.
Despite this spin, Australia's David Brabham would finish 12th in one of his best races of the season. All of a sudden, it looked like being Michael Schumacher's worst.
Oh, but looks to be fighting his way past Schumacher, which seems quite extraordinary. That looks exactly as if Schumacher is in fact stuck in 5th gear, which would account for his performance.
You didn't need telemetry to work out Martin Brundle's problem. A repeat of his podium finish from Monaco wouldn't come in this race.
He'll want to be very quick to get out of that.
New leader Damon Hill kept the championship flame alight. Incredibly, Schumacher held on for second. No surprises in qualifying for Montreal, with Michael Schumacher once again starting on pole.
And they boil away. Schumacher takes the lead. The 2 Ferraris right behind him.
When the race was underway, Katayama was going in the opposite direction to everyone else, in a risky bid to recover from a spin.
We used to say that is no surprise.
Schumacher took the checkered flag more than 30 seconds in front of Hill. Lacey finished officially 3rd, despite missing this chicane on the last lap when his car got stuck in 2nd gear. Plenty of interest at Magny-Cours, with former world champion Nigel Mansell making a guest appearance for Williams. The Englishman sharing the front row of the grid with countryman Damon Hill.
Good start, Hill. Magnificent start, Schumacher.
Mansell's return to the sport was short-lived. Mechanical problems forcing him out just past the halfway point.
And into the pit lane comes Nigel Mansell.
The exit of John Lacey was much more spectacular.
He's done what he did before. In practice, he's gone off at the left-hander at the chicane. Now there is debris and stones all over the track.
And he creates his own smoke. Now what happened there was that Lacey spun around, he created his own tyre smoke, leaving Barrichello with totally blind. He couldn't see what had happened and just veered into the side.
Mika Häkkinen was also an early retirement, a fire forcing him out in the closing stages.
Well, this really does fill the Peugeot cup of misery to overflowing.
Schumacher was untroubled in recording his 6th win from 7 races, opening up an incredible 37-point championship lead over runner-up Damon Hill. Plenty of support for Damon Hill in his home race, and some luck as well. Schumacher illegally passed the Englishman on the parade lap, a move that would haunt him for the rest of the season. After a delay for David Coulthard's blown engine, the race was finally underway. Martin Brundle proving that where there's smoke...
That great burst of flame.
In front, Schumacher was looking good, but it was time to pay for the parade lap passing incident.
Schumacher is going to be black flag.
This could well be the end of his race. He will be out of the race for not having obeyed that command to come in for a stop-go penalty.
While the Benetton team argued furiously with the race officials, Schumacher stayed out on the track, a move that would earn him a 2-race suspension. The German finally went in for the stop-go penalty, giving Hill the lead in a race his illustrious father Graham never won.
Damon Hill exits the last corner and the crowd roars, and rightly so, and he wins the British Grand Prix. Magnificent.
It's just a dream come true that I've won the British Grand Prix, and I feel like that has completed the little hole that my father left in his record, and I'm sure that he'll be delighted. Well, what a kaleidoscope so far. Exciting pictures and great words. Now, we'll continue our review of the season right after the break.
Nigel is back, and don't they love him here in Adelaide? He enjoys a tremendous following. The interior of a modern Formula One racer is vastly different to what you'd be accustomed to in your family sedan. To give us an idea of what a racing driver has at his fingertips, David Coulthard provided a guided tour of the Formula One flight deck.
My name is David Coulthard, and this is me sitting in the Rothmans Williams Renault, which is the car I test for Williams team. As you can see in here, we have a normal steering wheel like any car. The big difference being, of course, that we don't have a gear lever in a conventional place. Our gear lever is these paddles here. And simply you pull this lever here for up gears, so second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and this paddle here for the down gears. Also on the steering wheel you can see we have a data button, which is just used for telemetry, an automatic neutral, which is used on the pit stops, and this is an auto shift button for the gearbox, and also the radio switch for when I want to talk to my engineer. The steering wheel is fitted to the car by means of a quick release mechanism, which you pull like this. In the cockpit, we have, for testing purposes only, we have an adjustable front anti-roll bar, which you can see here. Position 5 is for full stiff, and position 1 is for full soft. And this just controls the front roll of the car. And when you drive the lap, you can adjust this bar like this. The rest of the car you can see is quite clearly marked. And here we have the power switch, which when switched on, of course, we can see everything on the dashboard. Pretty much everything else, you have here your rev warning lights, so you know when to change gear because the acceleration is very, very quick. In the dashboard we have here, this is the switch for the power, which enables the rev display, and also, as you can see here, we have water temperature on the left-hand side. On the middle, this is quite simply to tell us which gear we are in the car. And this side here we have a clock, which is for the lap time, so when we stop we can see exactly which lap time we have done. Obviously here you can see clearly marked as the fire switch. If there's any problems with the car, then I flick this and I can put the extinguisher on. And over here we just have some other systems for the engine. And that's basically all the information we get from the dashboard. Moving over to the other side of the dash and moving down into the tub, we have a brake balance adjuster on the right-hand side, which you can see is clearly marked. Front is clockwise. And the last systems that we have in the car is for engine control. This is just a mixture adjustment for all the controls on the engine, which obviously Renault decides, and also Elf decide in which positions they would like those to be. But apart from that, you have the steering wheel on, start like a normal car, and you have your 3 pedals, and off you go.
Well, if I may say, a very polished performance by a very young and inexperienced driver to come in and do a job like that. As you know, it's not easy to do that kind of thing.
No, very impressive, Jackie, but you've put him through a media school, or he goes through a media school, did he? Or?
Well, he was racing for 3 years with Paul Stewart Racing, a team that I have with my son, and we put them through public speaking courses and media coaching. Yeah. But he's carried it off better than any other driver I can remember.
Yeah, he's got a lot of polish in the cockpit and out on the track. The final qualifying shootout for pole position, plus your chance to win a Holden Calibra. That's just part of the excitement in store today on the Australian Formula One Grand Prix coverage. Sit tight, we'll be back right after this. Yeah. Once again on Wide World of Sports, the commentary team is wall-to-wall with world champions. Jackie Stewart won 3 Formula One crowns. Alan Jones picked up his title in 1980. And Barry Sheene collected 2 500cc World Championships. Now, on the weekend that decides the 1994 World Drivers' Championship, these 3 legends are back in their original race machinery. After all this time, out of the top drawer, have these world-class champions their skills deserted them? We're about to find out as they get back into harness for a tilt at the Adelaide track.
This is all new this year,
Well,
isn't it?
it's not that new. What they've done, I think, is taken away some of the runoff area up here, but moved the angle of attack into a finer angle. If somebody does come off, put more kitty litter down at this end, and then, of course, it is now called the Ayrton Senna chicane.
I don't know whether Ayrton would want a chicane named after him. I think he'd be the sort of guy that would like a nice big long sweeping corner named after him.
Well, I think he's going to end up by having a chicane named after him that's going to be full of action this weekend.
Don't you
I think you're right.
By doing this, though, AJ, before, if you went off here, you were in the
Yeah.
But now, you know, there's a good chance of getting over the good chance of taking a chance.
Well, you've got a better chance if you lose it to maybe scream out the other end in a far less unabated speed. And I think that's going to suck a lot of people in, and I'd probably cause a few more accidents, I believe.
Well, enough about the dramas here. Let's have a look at the rest of the track. Huh?
Okay.
Come on. By the time you're coming into this area here, they're more than halfway down the straight. They're beginning to wonder, and this could be the first lap, it could be any time. The braking distance here is where the passing's going to happen.
They're beginning to wonder if they're going to stop his race.
We've seen a lot of action on this part of the circuit too, Jackie. We've seen Nigel Mansell's tyre blow, Nicky Lauder hit the wall here. I mean, there's been a few Grand Prix decided in this very spot.
It is the heaviest braking part. I mean, this is where the old carbon fibre brakes absolutely get red hot, and this is where they go right down to first gear.
Well, this is Adelaide's traditionally known as the hardest circuit anywhere on brakes.
On brakes, but also on gearboxes, because nobody in a Formula One car ever wants to get into first gear when you're coming right through from top gear and then accelerate hard in first. It's very easy to strip a set of gears here.
This section we're coming up to, we see a lot of accidents too, Jackie. It's not so much the little left-hand sweeper we're going through now, but the next one after that, there seems to be an awful lot of accidents into that corner. They obviously come through here and start to get the braking all wrong here, and we see the consequences up to the apex of the next one.
And of course they peel off to the right-hand side coming in for their fuel stops and their tyre stops, so...
Potentially dangerous, I think, because it's through a right-hand sweeper, and if the guy is on the right-hand side going very slow and there's a guy behind him wanting to do a hot lap or whatever, potentially a fairly dangerous area, that.
It's a sensational finish. 3 world champions absolutely together. Sheen's marginally in the lead. Jones on the right. And as they cross the line, it's a dead heat.
We really enjoyed the track.
Yes, we did. We've got a good look.
I don't think we look silly.
No, nor do I. No, I don't care.
We're back. And I've got to tell you, Barry Sheene, what a terrific idea. It was his idea to go along with that.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have done it myself, but Barry says, Jackie, I think it's going to be good for your Australian audience. Build up your image.
Yeah, because you did fight against it for a while, though, but Barry comes up with some great ideas.
Well, anyway, right now the teams are preparing for the very serious business of qualifying. Let's hear the latest from the pit lane.
So, the second qualifying session On Saturday afternoon, 60 minutes, which is usually the crucial time, because after the cars have gone out for 60 minutes on Friday, and in the case of Adelaide, rubbered up the circuit, means that the second session is going to be quicker. But that is very, very unlikely to be the case today. The reason you can see for yourselves, very simply, is that there has been heavy rain here all morning. The track is wet. You can see the cars going out, and they are on wet weather tyres, very heavily treaded tyres. And in the pits is Barry Sheen with Nigel Mansell and Damon Hill.
Right, okay, well, no, you're not going to do anything, Nigel. I'm down here, down here in the pits with these two chaps. I don't trust. Oh, no, come. Hey, come here. Oh, I can't be fair. You. Yeah, I guess whose idea that was.
Damon.
Oh, yeah, right. So now I know it's raining. I know. What do you reckon of weather? You're going to tell me it's raining. Stop it. How does this affect you for the setup of the race?
Damon, how does it affect us?
I was going to ask you, actually. Barry, any ideas?
Okay, so what do you help me? I've always been nice to you. Now, be sensible. Well, it's hopeless, this, isn't it?
No, look, Barry, I know when you walk out in the rain you don't get wet, but we do, you know?
I know, but I'm asking you, are you looking for, what would you prefer, a dry race or a wet race?
I think for everybody, I think, and for the championship. I hope you got that on film.
But that's 1-1 now.
I think it'd be better if it was dry.
What about you, Dane?
Well, I won the last one in the wet, but I think I prefer it to be in the dry because simply because it's just a nicer day out for everyone, and also our car's much quicker in the dry.
Because when you look on the monitor, the Benetton does look the Benetton does look like the easier car to drive in the wet.
Yeah, I think they've got a bit more drag, a bit more download that they can use in wet conditions, and you know, we're at our maximum, and that's why we're a little bit quicker down the straights, but we're not as quick around the corners. But
so you went out in practice in the rain. So say if it rains tomorrow prior to the race.
Come on, Barry, get it out.
Shut up. Are you going to have any more? Are you going to have any more practice in the wet?
Yeah, I think the most important practice of all weekend, I think Damon probably agree, is the warm-up tomorrow morning. We'll wait and see what happens.
And what about, you went off the second time, why was that?
Why was that? I prefer to do that and hit the wall, so I went down the escape road. It was very tricky conditions. Oh, that was not nice. That is tricky conditions. I tell you, if you're a friend of Nigel Mansell, you don't need enemies, right? With that, we hand you back to the studios. Look at the face on it. Get out.
I have been at the receiving end of that sort of Nigel Mansell treatment many, many times, and I can tell you, it's very difficult when you're trying to do a serious interview with him, and Nigel does not want to be serious. But sadly, here at Adelaide at the moment, the conditions are Suzuka revisited, by which I mean you will remember from last Sunday, the cars were going round sending up great roosters of spray. That's the situation here. I was going to say that with a bit of luck, things will dry out and we'll get a dry line emerging, and we'll have the most exciting situation possible in a qualifying session, starting off wet, finishing up dry, and all the cars coming out. But sadly, that does not look as though it's going to be the case.
No, I don't think it does, Murray. The rain's coming down pretty hard. We can see it on the picture. And in fact, that's the reason why, really, Damon Hill and Nigel Mansell there were far more relaxed than one might expect. At the start of what could be a critical qualifying session, you would never normally see two of the leading drivers, in fact any of the drivers, being as relaxed and fun-filled as that. But the reason is that they know perfectly well, or certainly in their estimation know, that the times that they're going to be doing this afternoon will not affect their position on the grid. So far, Mansell is on the provisional pole, almost certain to be the pole, with Damon Hill 2 places behind in 3rd place, and so they know that for the two Williams drivers, in fact, as with most people here, they will be looking to just do some laps to make sure that the weather setup of these cars is as ideal as it can be.
So it looks, subject to the weather drying out, which as both of us have said is very unlikely, as though Nigel Mansell is going to be in his 32nd pole position in his return to Grand Prix racing after having driven in the French Grand Prix, where he started second on the grid to Damon Hill. And then, of course, he appeared for the European Grand Prix at Jerez and last Sunday's Grand Prix in Japan. But with Nigel Mansell on the pole position, Michael Schumacher alongside him on the second row of the grid, Damon Hill is going to be really up against it because he's starting from the second row behind the man who is leading him in the World Championship and who somehow or other he's got to beat. Very difficult, Alan, to get by here.
It is, Murray. It's an extremely difficult circuit to pass on, and therefore grid positions are very, very important indeed. And it is a shame that we're not going to have another shootout this afternoon, but it really does show us firsthand how important each and every qualifying session is. And that's why yesterday, they had to treat yesterday if it was their first and only qualifying session, because exactly what we've got today, it's wet, and what you saw, whoa, old Brundle giving it the welly a little bit early, coming out of the corner and putting it sideways. Once again, this is a tricky situation too, because they have to set the car up for the wet conditions in the likelihood that it could be wet tomorrow, but on the other hand, they don't want to put it in the wall today.
Yes, that's right. See, one of the other problems that they've got here at the moment is that they can't be absolutely sure that the circuit is not going to dry out. And if it does dry out in the dying minutes of this qualifying session, and it has been known in the past, then it's going to be important that all the cars are in the right condition to make best use of that, to have a crack at the dry weather times, because they could eclipse those of yesterday. And even more importantly, it's vital that the drivers have enough laps left available to make use of any. And there's Martin Brundle running straight on, sensibly not trying to lock it up and spin the car. But it's important that they do have enough laps available just in case it does dry out, because each of these drivers only has, from the regulations, 12 laps that they are allowed to complete in this qualifying session.
Well, you talk about a circuit, a green circuit. Now, with a road circuit such as this, which is not a permanent circuit, it doesn't have a constant build-up of rubber on it. This is what they call a street circuit. So for the first couple of days, it's very, very green. Yesterday, we had a slight build-up of rubber as the race and practice sessions continued. Now, this rain will wash that off and virtually almost go back to a green condition again.
Martin Brundle, that you are looking at the present moment, is going to be starting 9th on the grid for the Australian Grand Prix tomorrow. A man with a lot of Grand Prix experience, because he started with Tyrrell as long ago as 1984. Then he drove for the German Zaxby team, as did Jonathan Palmer alongside me. And after that, Martin had one drive for Williams in 1988 in the Belgian Grand Prix, when Nigel Mansell had chicken pox or something, some complaint that stopped him from racing for just the one event. Then a couple of years with Brabham, Martin Brundle, Benetton, and now McLaren. And he showed an enormous amount of application and determination, because he had other offers to drive in Grand Prix teams during this year, but he stood by and decided he wanted to drive for McLaren. It was the top team, and in the end his determination was rewarded, as a result of which he's done extremely well with a new engine, the new Peugeot V10 engine, which is propelling him now, because he was second in the Monaco Grand Prix, and he's had 3 other points places, as a result of which he's 8th in the World Championship with 12 points. And Martin is a much better racer than he is a qualifier. He's been doing very well in the races. Now, you're watching Wide World of Sports. We're going to be back soon for the continuation of final qualifying. Welcome back to Adelaide, where only 4 of the 28 drivers who are qualifying for tomorrow's Australian Grand Prix, or at least 26 of them, have so far gone out on the circuit. There, Michael Schumacher, but here is Ukyo Katayama, undoubtedly the best Formula One driver that Grand Prix racing has ever produced. So the positions on yesterday's timings, which are more than unlikely to be beaten today, indicate that Nigel Mansell, on his return to Grand Prix racing, will be starting from pole position for the 32nd time in his career, which began in 1980. And second on the grid will be Michael Schumacher, the man who's leading the World Championship by just 1 point from Damon Hill, who will be starting third on the grid, ahead of Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Peugeot 4th. Then the two Jordan Harts of Brazilian Rubens Barrichello and Irishman Eddie Irvine, 5th and 6th. 7th on the grid, Johnny Herbert in the Benetton Ford. And Herbert, of course, has driven for Lotus in the past, started his Grand Prix career for Benetton, so he's going back home in a way. And surprisingly, the top Ferrari, that of Jean Alesi, is only going to be 8th on the grid, ahead of Martin Brundle. But we've got a Ferrari driver in the pits with Charles Stewart. Gerhard Berger is the man you'll be hearing from.
Yeah, it seemed that you had a few problems sorting the car out yesterday, but today, this morning, things are going a lot better. Why is that?
Yeah, I've changed a lot the car, it should be better. Still difficult, but yeah, this morning was quite competitive.
You must be hoping for some dry weather for this last qualifying session.
Yeah, I hope so. It's raining and it's wet, but I need some dry laps.
Now, what about if it turns out to be a wet race tomorrow? Is that something that will suit you?
No, I was out in the wet, I was quick in the wet this morning. So I think in the wet I could do quite well, but on the other side, this circuit is so much luck involved for wet because it's so slippery, you know, that I honestly prefer dry.
Well, after 2 wins here, this must be a place that you enjoy, is it?
Yeah, I like very much, but yesterday was a bit frustrating because I don't like to be on 11th, but on the other side, it's challenging for the 8th. It would be nice the last 10 minutes to be dry and to do a good lap time.
All right, well, good luck this afternoon.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Gerhard Berger, 3rd in the World Championship, and if you think he has an impish look of humour about him, you're absolutely right. He's one of the great practical jokers of the Grand Prix world, and the jokes that he and Ayrton Senna used to play on each other are legendary, including Gerhard Berger putting 25 live frogs in Ayrton Senna's bedroom on one occasion. But now we're watching newcomer Mika Salo, the Finnish driver, in the Lotus Mugen, and Salo has done an absolutely superb job. Before the Japanese Grand Prix, he had only driven in Formula 3000. He'd never even sat in a Formula 1 car. He did extremely well in Japan. Lotus very quickly commissioned him to drive in Australia as well, and Mika Salo has done extremely well in the practicing and in the warm-up this morning.
And as we watch Salo going round there, it's probably worth just clarifying exactly what these drivers and teams are trying to achieve, bearing in mind that in these conditions they'll have no chance to improve upon their grid time from yesterday, and that is to actually become familiar with the car, to work on the setup during this session, just in case tomorrow's race is wet, and that's always on the cards. It was very wet, of course, the last Grand Prix at Suzuka. Now, whilst we had a practice session this morning that was also wet for certainly half of it, in that situation it was, we just heard that Nigel Mansell was getting ready to come out. Now, in that situation this morning, the drivers had something of a dilemma. Do they go out in the wet session this morning and try and gain some experience with the car and potentially risk going off and damaging it, which could then compromise what might have been a dry qualifying session? Or do they wait until this qualifying session to sort the car out in the wet? And cars do feel quite different. Now, as we look at Nigel Mansell in that cockpit, see that lump of apparently black on the bottom of his visor opening? That's a little bit of tape that will keep the visor just open, because of course visibility is an appalling problem in the wet. Visibility from the spray, from water on your visor, and it's the airflow over the front of the visor that keeps the visor clear, but also from steaming up, and that little bit of tape underneath will keep the visor just ajar, and that'll help prevent it steaming up, whilst Nigel Mansell goes out and he sees how his car feels in these conditions, because tomorrow morning, although the warm-up is important, it might be dry, for example, leaving the race in wet conditions, and what the teams find out during this session could be absolutely vital for their performance in a wet race.
And while Nigel's in the pit, it's worth having a look at those tyres of his, as you now see Olivier Parnish in the Ligier. Each of those Goodyear tyres, wet weather tyres, has got a different tread pattern on it. You've got to have the right tread pattern on the left front, you've got to have the correct one on the right front, and the same applies at the rear, because those very deep channels in the tread of the tyre are designed to clear water away from the track by literally pumping it off the surface. The tread cuts through the water, grips the tarmac. People think that on road cars, if you have bald tyres, you're in trouble potentially, and indeed you're right, because if it's wet, you're going to be in danger. But on a racing car, in dry conditions, you want the maximum amount of rubber on the track to grip the tarmac, And when it's wet, you want to avoid aquaplaning, where the cars can literally hit puddles and skate off on the surface of the water because the tyres can't pump it away fast enough. And that is why these tyres have been designed the way they are. But Alan, if the weather was like this tomorrow, which I hope it certainly isn't, paradoxically, the drivers in the less powerful cars would not be as badly off as though they were in the race.
Oh, absolutely, Murray. In fact, if you're a young driver aspiring to get to one of the leading teams, in one of the lesser teams, sometimes you actually ask for this sort of weather because it does allow you to display your talent and be a little bit further up the grid than what you would normally be in dry conditions.
Yes, I would say, Alan, that's certainly the case in qualifying, but for the race I'm not quite so sure, because whilst a younger driver in a modest performance car can have the chance to shine through, and it's in the wet that driver skill counts for more than ever, the problem in the race itself is one of visibility, and the fact that if you're back on 18th place on the grid tends to spread out very quickly away from the start, because of course the guy at the front, he's the only one who can see, and he'll continue being able to see until he comes up after perhaps 10 or 15 laps to lap the first of the back marker. So overtaking is even more difficult in the wet than it is in the dry from a visibility point of view, although one area where it's actually easier is the fact that braking distances become longer. For example, instead of braking at perhaps the 100-metre point going into the end of Brabham Straight down towards the hairpin, you probably have to brake round about the 130, 140 metres. So you've got a greater braking distance to try and get by somebody on. That's if you can see.
Well, let's ignore the younger drivers for the moment and concentrate on the oldest driver in tomorrow's Australian Grand Prix. Nigel Mansell, 41 years old, down there in the Williams Renault. And tomorrow he will be starting in his 185th Grand Prix with all that experience and, of course, the experience of 2 years Indy racing where he was champion last year. And Nigel really wants to get back into Formula One. He's got to make his mark tomorrow because in the French Grand Prix, in the European Grand Prix and in the Japanese Grand Prix, he didn't go as well as he would have hoped to have done. And he was always aiming to do well in Australia at the last Grand Prix of the year. Because, as far as we know, the drivers for the Williams team in 1985 have not yet been finalised. And the options, of course, for Frank Williams are Nigel Mansell, Damon Hill and David Coulthard, who has done so well in the 8 Grand Prix that he's driven in this year. So Nigel has got a lot to do in tomorrow's race.
Yes, this indeed will be his last chance, tomorrow's race, to really show what kind of pace he can put in. We saw signs of the Mansell talent coming through at the highest level at Suzuka, in fact, in the Saturday morning practice session, the session that did not count towards the grid, in that Mansell in that session was nearly 1 second faster than teammate Damon Hill. Now, in the qualifying session in the afternoon, it rained, so he didn't have the chance to demonstrate whether or not he could maintain that pace advantage over Hill when it was in dry conditions. But now, let's just have a think about what Mansell's got to do at the moment. In this morning session, he did not go out, and or right at the very end, he did not do a significant lap time. His teammate Damon Hill did. Damon Hill was out doing quite a few laps, and his best was a 1:36.2 in the wet weather conditions. Mansell has just clocked a 1:39.6, but that was on only his second flying lap. So it'll be quite interesting for us to see whether Nigel can end up lapping round about 1:34s, maybe inside that time of Damon Hill's.
Well, knowing Nigel, I would imagine he would be very keen now to display that he's just as quick in the wet as what he is in the dry. And this will be an exercise. He knows that he's got pole position. There's no problems there. This will be, hey, look at this, fellas. I'm now going to show you I can also do it in the wet.
So Nigel Mansell is doing his best in the wet, but don't go away because the final qualifying session is going to continue in just a moment. Michael Schumacher, World Championship leader by 1 point, and starting second on the grid for tomorrow's race is out on the track. He's slowed right down now so that he can accelerate hard and see what the grip conditions are like in the Benetton 4.
And we can see Michael Schumacher there just canting his head from side to side, looking in his mirrors. He wants to move away as late as he can so he can get as much clear track in front of him as he can. He really wants to see how his Benetton will perform in wet conditions, but he does not want to take any more risk than he needs to, and helping that will be keeping a clear field in front of him so he's not following along in a cloud of spray. And spray is the big enemy, because apart from anything else, the biggest risk in driving in wet conditions is aquaplaning, and one aquaplanes when you drive across standing water, and in the spray you can't see that standing water, so it's important to try and keep that vision clear so that if you do see the flooding across the track, you can straight line the car as it goes across and try and prevent yourself going off.
We've noticed in the last couple of days that Schumacher always comes to nearly a standstill at that particular corner. Now, whether that's because of his telemetry, whether that's where he starts his lap, I'm not sure. Perhaps you could throw some more light on that.
Yeah, I think what it does there, Alan, I think that it's a point on the track in which he gets a good clear view behind him. He's got a good 500 metres behind, so he can see any car coming up behind him, and then he can pull away just when he sees something so that he knows he's got a clear lap in front of him.
It's amazing watching Michael Schumacher and looking back at him now to realise that yesterday at the centre chicane doing about 100 miles an hour, he hit the right curb, lost the back of the car, hit the left curb, went into the tyre wall at about just under 100 miles an hour, got out of the car, which had to be completely rebuilt overnight. They have a spare tub, a spare chassis, carbon fibre chassis in the garage, and all the parts necessary to build a completely new car, which he went out in this morning. He didn't use his race car this morning because he wanted to get the spare car, which had been built up overnight, absolutely right for the race in case he has to use it tomorrow. And he was completely unfazed by what had happened to him yesterday. I talked to him very shortly after he got out of the car. He was totally relaxed. He said that's one of the things that happens in Formula One, and you just have to be prepared to put up with it. But he is quite astoundingly fit, undoubtedly the most fit man in Grand Prix racing, and it didn't seem to affect him at all. And now he's the fastest in this session so far. So Schumacher is doing in the wet what he would ideally have liked to have done in the dry, running fastest, 1 minute 34.497.
Yes, and we just saw how hard Schumacher was trying just then. He got rather late on the brakes coming into that corner. He missed the apex, he ran wide, but salvaged the situation. So this particular lap will not be an improvement, I'm quite sure, on that 34. But talking about times, Nigel Mansell, we'd said that Damon Hill had done a 36 this morning. Mansell did a 36 himself before coming in. But I really can't overemphasize how desperately tricky these cars are to drive in these conditions. When you think that they weigh about 520 kilos, that's 1/3 of the weight of an average family car, and there the back comes around, Schumacher's lightning reflexes catch it, so they weigh 1/3 of the weight of a family car, but they've got about 3 or 4 times the power of even sports cars. These cars will do 0 to 240 kph in just 6.5 seconds, and in these conditions the grip is very, very marginal, and they have to be very, very sensitive with the throttle, feeding in that 800 horsepower, 750 horsepower, feeding it in gently, and if they make one nervous jab on the accelerator going around a corner, the car would spin. They've got to be very, very delicate indeed. With a 34 now, another 34 for Schumacher. Now that's interesting, because having just said he wouldn't improve, if he's done a 34 running wide like that, that would probably mean that the next lap, if he keeps it neat and tidy, will be something like a 32. I would have thought he would have lost a couple of seconds on that, certainly one. And interesting, as the cars go round, the drivers are all taking the racing line, and this is essentially, of course, just trying to straight line the circuit, straight cut the corners. And the drivers who are really doing it well will be running within about 2 or 3 inches, that's around about 5 centimetres only, of these apex curbs, the exit curbs. Just watch the position of the car's tyres against the curbs, particularly on the apex as they're halfway around the corner.
To compound the problem, have a look at the road surface and the painted lines on it, because those lines can cause the cars to break away because they're polished and they're very slippery indeed. But the final qualifying session is going to be continuing in a moment. Back on the track at Adelaide, there are 25 minutes left of the final qualifying session. 9 drivers have not yet gone out. Michael Schumacher is by far the fastest, as you watch Jean Alesi in the Ferrari, who will be starting 8th on the grid tomorrow. Now, very significantly, one of the drivers who has not gone out is Damon Hill, because there is psychological warfare going on here at Adelaide. Damon Hill went off this morning in the first half of the free practice session, and just to prove me wrong, there he is. He went off in the dry this morning, and he also went off in the wet. And I was going to say, maybe for some reason he's not going out in this second session, so as not to be shown up by a very, very quick Michael Schumacher, who is a full 2 seconds faster than the second fastest driver so far, which is Mika Häkkinen. Now, just make a mental note of the fact that Michael Schumacher's fastest time in this wet session is 1 minute 33.420, and compare it with Damon Hill, who is really going for it. You can see from the way the car is sliding on the track.
Yes, Damon this morning was really driving the car exceedingly hard. I think, frankly, overdriving the car. It was sideways on most of the corners, with quite big lurid slides being induced by the fact that he was trying so hard. There's his teammate Nigel Mansell. Now, one of the funny things about watching racing cars, in even the dry and also the wet, is that when you see a slide with the car that really looks pretty impressive, the chances are it's actually slowing the car down, because these cars work at their very best. You get the best lap time out of them when you're keeping them right on the brink between being just about to slide or sliding so little that we can't see it looking from the outside. And I think this morning Damon was overdriving it, sliding too much, and that contributed to the fact that he went off twice. But the man that's impressed me, in fact a couple of people have particularly impressed me, apart from Michael Schumacher, who once again has underlined the fact that he's of a different level of talent, and that the kind of knock that he suffered yesterday does nothing towards tempering that. It's been Mika Häkkinen for one, because Mika Häkkinen is currently the second fastest out there, and Mika Häkkinen was dealt quite a major psychological blow at the last Grand Prix in Suzuka, when he was some 2 seconds a lap slower than teammate Martin Brundle, inexplicably, both in the wet qualifying session, right front wheel locking there on Damon Hill's car, and also in the race itself. And so Häkkinen has felt that he's got some kind of blind spot, a difficulty with handling the car in the wet, and he's certainly put that one to one side with his performance so far. But another guy who's been quick is Gianni Morbidelli. Now, he's running back in 21st place on the grid in the footwork car, but he's set about the third fastest time. And this demonstrating one of the things that Alan was saying earlier, that the wet conditions do provide a chance for drivers in modest equipment to demonstrate just how good they are. But look again how hard Damon Hill is trying. He's done a 36.0 on his last lap, and that compares to 33 for Michael Schumacher.
It also demonstrates people like Schumacher, who often get accused sometimes by various people, well, gee, if I was in that car, I could be doing that as well. So when someone with the talent of Schumacher can get out in these conditions and say, all right, do you think he could do that as well? I mean, the time today in these conditions, that is driving talent. There, that's it. End of story. But tomorrow, we hear it's going to be a nice sunny day. These conditions are going to clear up. So we're looking for a real good, clean, dry race tomorrow.
Now, the time that you see on the right, Mansell 1:16.179, is, of course, his pole position time from yesterday's dry qualifying session. So you get an indication of how much this wetness slows the drivers down. Damon Hill is just approaching the end of his lap, and 1 minute 35.511 is marginally slower than Häkkinen's time. Schumacher is still by far the quickest, 1:33.420, looking in very good shape tomorrow. He's fit. He's got the cars organised, both his race car and what is called the T car, which is the spare car. And you can see the conditions for yourselves well enough. And you can see, as we look down from the helicopter, the lines I was talking about, which can be very slippery indeed, particularly coming out of the right-hander at Stag Turn, which is where a lot of cars went off in the notoriously wet races that we've had in the past in 1989 and 91. And there you see them. Adhesion is at a minimum as they go across those lines down the fastest part of the course now.
Yes, and in the dry they'd be doing 295 kph at this point on the circuit, but in the wet that's reduced by about 10 kph. The reason being partly because, of course, they've come out of the previous corner a little bit slower. And the other reason being that actually displacing all of that water takes energy, takes power, and all of the spray that we see pluming off the tyres is only doing so because it's absorbed precious horsepower in doing so. But look again how hard Damon Hill is trying. And Michael Schumacher, I'm quite sure, would have looked much less spectacular than Damon Hill is, but driving, in fact, the better for it. Now, Hill runs wide there, and that is not necessarily a mistake, because in wet conditions, it's very important to try and find as much grip as you can on the circuit, and often the actual ideal racing line, cutting across to the inside, that is taken lap after lap in the dry, means that the rubber gets built up on the ideal racing line, a bit of oil gets built up, a bit of petrol, everything gets ingrained into the track. And that can mean that in wet conditions, that's actually very slippery. So if one can find a bit of fresh green track, as we call it, that hasn't been run on, there's often more grip to be found. But we don't do that everywhere, because often in trying to achieve that, you'd take such a long way round the course that it would actually be the lesser of the evils, or the greater of the evils.
And often in these conditions, when the rain is abating, and we're looking at Nigel Mansell now, and the circuit starts to dry out, you can see the first signs of it. And what you can see there, as he went round the right-hander, that there's a slight channel for the right-hand wheels and the rear and the left-hand wheels starting to emerge. Obviously, there's no way the track is going to dry out in the remaining time which is left, which is just about 18.5 minutes. Marvellous shot there of Nigel Mansell, and you can see that the car is absolutely on the edge of the envelope between sticking on the track and going off it, and this is where a driver's reflexes are at a premium, and Nigel Mansell demonstrated yesterday how his reflexes are totally undiminished when he came round the left-hander at East and lost the car completely, deliberately, because parked in the middle of the road was Johnny Herbert's Benetton, and from 100 to nothing, Nigel Mansell stopped his car just inches away from Johnny Herbert, and that called for supreme skill and an enormous amount of experience.
Right, Damon Hill now, 1 minute 33.9. He's really got down onto the pace. That's towards Schumacher's time. But on the other hand, the track is slightly drying out now. I think the rain is abating. But another very quick man on the track is Jean Lacey, who's using his great car control to great effect. He's also done a 33, and in fact, just marginally faster than Damon Hill there.
So, Damon Hill, and don't go away again. Final qualifying is going to continue shortly. Minutes to go of the final qualifying session for the Australian Grand Prix, and there is pitch battle out there on the soaking wet track as the drivers vie for the fastest time in the wet. Michael Schumacher has just gone round faster again, 1 minute 33.025, the fastest time of the afternoon. But behind him, 9/10 of a second behind him, there is Jean Lacey in the Ferrari, who is only just a few hundredths of a second off Nigel Mansell and Damon Hill. And the order at the present moment is Schumacher fastest, Lacey second, Hill is third, Mansell is in fourth position. It's very close to the second, third and fourth. But once again, Michael Schumacher, the young German World Championship leader, as you watch Nigel Mansell going for it in the closing stages of the lap, is showing the pace of the day. Michael Schumacher, the man to challenge, as Nigel Mansell in the Williams Renault V10 goes down the straight into the right-hander. There is Michael Schumacher behind him, and you can get an indication now of what the visibility must be like for Schumacher behind Mansell, as Mansell comes down the Brabham straight into the hairpin, runs wide, Schumacher taking a tight line, closes up a bit, runs wide as they go now into paddock turn, which they take in fourth gear extremely quickly, and Mansell coming around. I'm just going to hold him for this lap, and we'll see how he goes in comparison with his own previous time of 1 minute 33.988, and how Michael Schumacher, the quickest man on the track in the wet so far this afternoon that you're watching now, 32.627. Well, Schumacher goes into the pits, Nigel Mansell does not. He goes across the line, 1 minute 34.1, so he's slower than he was before.
So Schumacher once again setting the pace here in the wet conditions, and in these sort of conditions the lap times are some 16 seconds slower than they are in the dry. The pole position looks like going to Mansell on a 16.179, and where that time comes from is largely round the corners, with the lack of grip meaning that the cars are cornering probably some 20 to 30 miles an hour slower. So instead of, for example, going through the turns in the Wakefield section at maybe something like 90, 100 k's at the very slowest point, they'll be doing perhaps well down to 80 k's. That's 50 k's less, 30 miles an hour less. And on the straight, about 10 miles an hour or 10 or 15 k's slower down the straight too. So it's mainly cornering grip, mainly the grip lost under braking that makes up that 16 seconds slower time.
But to put it into perspective to the Australian viewers watching, these guys think that they're doing very slow times because of the conditions. They're still nearly 4 seconds quicker than pole position for the Group A race.
So comparative power may be less of a disadvantage in the wet than it is in the dry, but the fact that that doesn't count for everything is indicated by the fact that you are looking at Mika Häkkinen, who is an extremely quick driver, who actually does not like the wet at all. Nobody likes it, but Häkkinen likes it less than most, and he showed that in the Japanese Grand Prix last Sunday. Now, the Peugeot engine in his McLaren has got less horsepower than the Ford Z-Tech in Michael Schumacher's car, and of course a lot less than the Renault engine. And Mika Häkkinen stopping, slows right down. I noticed the car was slipping around.
I think there's more than that, Murray. I think there's a lot of steam coming from that car, which looks like potentially an overheating problem, an engine problem. The Peugeot engine, it's V10, 3.5 litre engine. We can see it now. Look at that steam coming out, smoke coming out of the back of the car. We can see it coming out from behind the very back end of the engine cover, the wind then blowing it across the whole car. Marshals hopefully will be around pretty soon, just in case of the chance of fire. But it looks to me more like steam rather than smoke, Alan.
Well, there's a little bit of oil there, as you can see, Jonathan, coming out from the back of the car. So what he may have done now is just put the worst ingredients that any racing driver wants. Actually, there was quite a big bang from the engine, but he has now put what is the worst scenario, and that is oil mixed with water on the circuit.
Yeah, Mika Häkkinen has had a lot of problems with the Peugeot engine this year, as has Martin Brundle. But in fairness to the French concern, I will say that they were extremely brave to dive straight in at the deep end in Grand Prix racing when they made their debut with the McLaren team. They decided to do their development in public, and some of it has been pretty hard to take for them. Now you're looking at whoa, you're not. You're looking at Johnny Herbert. And that is an example of a spin turn. Johnny Herbert overrunning the corner, decided he couldn't quite make it, didn't worry at all, just did the spin turn and is back on the track. As you look at Katayama, 15th on the grid, but this Japanese driver, who, as I said earlier on, is by far the best that Japan has ever produced in Grand Prix racing, has had some excellent finishes. He's had 2 5th places this year, was hoping to do well in the Japanese Grand Prix in front of his home crowd. It was not to be. He retired with a blown Yamaha engine. And now Katayama is doing a time of 1 minute 36.6, which is about 4 seconds off Schumacher's pace.
Yes, Katayama, in fact, blowing his engine in qualifying at the Japanese Grand Prix. In the race itself, the conditions were so atrocious at the start that he simply aquaplaned off, a yellow flag, wing wave. Somebody must be off. Let's see if we can see who it is as Katayama goes by. Oh, that's probably Häkkinen. That's what it is behind that sign. But I think Häkkinen will probably, and he's pulled off here too. That's coming in there. But it's interesting reflecting on the fact that in these conditions, that looks like the Tyrrell there of Häkkinen, who we think pulled off for some reason. Maybe it's an engine problem for him again here, and again a little bit of smoke coming out the back of that. Although the fact that the cars are stopped can often cause a little bit of steam coming out of them as the heat generally comes around. But the stars here in this afternoon session, Michael Schumacher, the fastest in the wet, 32.6. Second to him, in fact, are the 2 Ferrari drivers, John Alesi on 33.9, with Gerhard Berger 33.8, just demonstrating once again what a superb talent these 2 Ferrari drivers are. Probably the best, the strongest combination of a team as we look at Martin Brundle. But the other people that have really impressed me are particularly Gianni Morbidelli, and Brundle gets it very wide on the curve. Morbidelli, who's now down to 35.1, making very good use of the modest HB power in the footwork car, and also Mark Blundell, in fact, who's also in the 35s, Blundell having done a 35.6. So interesting again to see how the drivers with the lesser cars can really demonstrate their abilities in these kind of conditions.
Well, sadly, the Ferraris will only be starting from 8th position on the grid, Jean Alesi, and 11th position on the grid, Gerhard Berger, tomorrow, because they had dreadful handling problems yesterday in the dry qualifying session. They couldn't get their car set up properly. Both the drivers were moaning all the time about how badly their cars handled, but they worked overnight on the setup, and Gerhard Berger was 3rd fastest in this morning's free session. Free means that the times are done to 1,000th of a second, but they don't count for the grid, and Jean Alesi was 5th fastest this morning. So they've obviously got their setup now, but sad news again as you look at Damon Hill, stationary in the Williams, at the other end of the grid. Once again, sheer bad luck has beaten the Belgian Bertrand Gachot in the New Pacific team, who have failed to qualify for Grand Prix after Grand Prix this year because the car really isn't up to it. But Gachot was hoping to do well. He had actually qualified yesterday, but then the wet conditions came. It's meant that he's not going to be in the race.
Murray, we see Damon Hill going out now. This is a bit intriguing. I can only assume that he's made a significant change to the car and he wants to see what the difference will be, because he only really has 1 lap remaining on his quota. Apart from that, we only have about 4 minutes. So, Jonathan, I can only assume that he's made quite a substantial change, and he's gone out for this 1 remaining lap to see, or 2 remaining laps, just to see what difference it makes.
Yeah, I would agree entirely that he certainly would have made a change to that car. I think there'll be little point in carrying on another run in essentially the same conditions. And, you know, of course, developing these cars, getting them into the best form, ready to start the race, is not just about drivers getting used to the circuit. That's the least of the factors. The biggest factor is the drivers working with their engineers, just adjusting bits of the car, adjusting the wing settings, adjusting the ride heights, adjusting the dampers, the springs, all of this to make the car run quickly and to their confidence as well.
Well, if I may differ with both of you, I think Damon may actually be trying for a quick one to catch Michael Schumacher. He's on his 10th lap at the moment. He's allowed 12 laps altogether, and it could well be that he's just decided to come out and have a final fling at Schumacher's fastest time of 1 minute 32.627. We'll see now as he goes into the lap, because this should be a very quick one indeed as far as he's concerned. He's through the centre chicane, up to Wakefield Street, the right-hander, then up Flinders and on towards Stag Turn.
Murray, another observation, and I think Jonathan will agree with me, I think all this weekend Damon has had a tendency to overdrive this car. I mean, he's absolutely trying too hard at the moment.
And we just saw the great demonstration of that very point just then. We saw Damon Hill brake too late coming into the Wakefield turns there. He braked too late. That caused him to run wide from the apex, and that mistake would have lost him 3 or 4 tenths of a second. And it's all those little mistakes adding up. And indeed, in the qualifying session, in the dry session on Friday, he did the same thing. Damon Hill is under pressure. He knows that. And at the moment, the example is, what we're seeing is the fact that he's not handling that pressure quite as well as Michael Schumacher, despite the fact that Schumacher is some 7 years his junior.
Yeah, and Schumacher is just coming onto the track now, perhaps finally to rub salt into the wound. There is Michael Schumacher, and in this final qualifying session there are less than 3.5 minutes left. But this is surprising, because I'm amazed to see Schumacher out on the track. I've just checked, and he's already done his 12 laps.
Well, one thing that's just worth pointing out on this was an example set by Gerhard Berger last year, who in the second qualifying session, which was clearly slower than the first, deliberately went beyond his 12 laps. He went up to 18 laps, in fact, because he was testing different things on the car. Now, the penalty for doing more than 12 laps was just simply having one's time disqualified. And if the session's bound to be slower, it really doesn't matter. So maybe Schumacher is just going to keep lapping in the knowledge that his time will be waived, because it doesn't matter.
Well, that's a very good point, and I'd be very tempted to do the same thing, because it is going to be a dry race tomorrow. We're pretty sure of that. We have already established grid positions for the race, so now is the time to do some experimenting. We don't really care about lap times.
You would, as a master tactician, Alan, you wouldn't have been tempted to do the same thing. You would have done the same thing.
Absolutely.
And with every justification. That is an excellent point.
Well, it certainly caught them unawares in terms of caught the organisers unawares last year. But if they've got any kind of memory too, they may have had some kind of contingency for this. And the only way they could actually stop Schumacher would be to put out the black flag. So let's just see if he gets a black flag when he comes around.
He doesn't notice those either.
Thank you, Alan. We'll let you know. Schumacher comes into the pit lane, so whatever he wanted to check, he has been able to check. And that's Johnny Herbert in the second of the two Benettons. Herbert, who has not shone as much as we hoped he would since he went to Benetton, but we've got news from Barry Sheene in the pit lane.
Yeah, I was listening to what AJ and Jonathan were saying. The reason that Damon has come in and gone out again, he's really unhappy with the balance of the car. He can't get the car to turn into the corner properly. It keeps locking the front end up, or it keeps tending to understeer. And he said, you know, when I try and get the power on it, it has no traction whatsoever, you know, so he's trying to get some traction and trying to get a decent balance of the car. You guys know more about balance than I do, but he's really very, very unhappy with the balance of the car. Yesterday in the drive practice in the morning, he said the thing was perfect, and he went out in the afternoon, the temperature was up, and it just really was wrong, and that was when he went straight on, if you remember, when the back end of the car locked up. So that's why he's all over the show at the moment.
Well, I have to say that in my experience, whenever one is chasing a time, whenever one is not setting the time itself, one always thinks that the grip level is too low. And to have understeer, which means, in fact, turning the steering wheel and the car plows straight on the way into a corner, and oversteer coming out when the back comes around, are just really symptoms of the fact that there is not enough grip, and he would like more grip overall. And that is something which cannot be addressed by changing the balance, because clearly both ends of the car are sliding, and when you've got that, what you need is more grip.
Well, it's all going to be academic very shortly, because there are only about 20 seconds left of this final qualifying session for tomorrow's Australian Grand Prix. And it's now or never as far as Damon Hill, who goes into the Decaturville hairpin and out of it, is concerned. Because if he wants to finish with a time close to Michael Schumacher and not let the German increase his psychological advantage over him, he's going to have to be very, very quick on this lap. We'll know because he's down to the last turn, and it's not a timed lap. Damon Hill was checking something and comes into the pit lane again. The time has concluded. Johnny Herbert is still out on the track, and of course, if you're out on the track, you finish the lap that you are on. And we're going to be back in a moment to have a look at the grid for tomorrow's showdown. With Friday afternoon's dry time, Nigel Mansell starts from pole position for the 32nd time in his long Grand Prix career, this time for tomorrow's Australian Grand Prix. But his time was only 18 one-thousandths of a second faster than Michael Schumacher. Damon Hill in the second, Williams is third on the grid, ahead of Mika Häkkinen fourth in the McLaren Peugeot. Then the Jordan Hart of Brazilian Rubens Barrichello. Sixth is Eddie Irvine in the second Jordan, ahead of Johnny Herbert in the second Benetton. The first Ferrari is that of Jean Alesi in 8th position, and Martin Brundle is in the second McLaren in 9th place. Heinz-Harald Frentzen leads the Sauber Chargers in 10th place. Berger 11th in the second Ferrari. Olivier Panis 12th, the Frenchman in the Ligier, ahead of Marc Blundell, Yamaha-powered Tyrrell. 14th is Zanardi, and 15th in the Lotus, and 15th is Ukyo Katayama in the second Tyrrell. Veteran Michele Alboreto from Italy is 16th in the Minardi Ford. JJ Leto in the second Sauber, the man from Finland, is 17th. And in the second Minardi is Pierluigi Martini, 18th. Christian Fittipaldi drives the Footwork Ford, 19th. Frank Lagorce, the French newcomer to Grand Prix racing, is 20th in the Ligier. Gianni Morbidelli, 21st for Footwork. Mika Salo, the newcomer from Finland in the second Lotus, is 22nd. Japanese driver Hideki Noda in the Larousse is 23rd. David Brabham from Australia for Simtek is 24th. And Jean-Denis Delatraz is in 26th position. 25th position. Domenico Schiattarella in the second Simtek completes the grid, because sadly, again, neither of the Pacific cars, Paul Belmondo and Bertrand Gachot, have been able to qualify. So, the stage is set for tomorrow's Australian Grand Prix, and it'll be, I prophesy, a superb race. Ken Sutcliffe.
Thank you very much, Murray. He prophesises.
He does indeed.
And he does it very, very well. That was a shame, Jackie, because, yesterday, I guess a lot of drivers say, well, we didn't do so well today and maybe we'll get it better tomorrow, and it didn't happen.
Disappointing, because I think the whole weekend was going to be waiting for who was going to be on pole and who was going to be on the front row, and of course Damon Hill finds himself in the second row, which is not to his advantage.
Well, we're joined by one of your fellow countrymen.
Yep.
David Coulthard. I bet you wish you were out there racing for Williams, and what's the story with your career?
Well, of course, I wish I was out there driving, but I'm the lady in waiting at the moment, if I can put it like that. I'm on the sidelines, and I'm back to test driver for Williams at the moment.
Is there any plans for next year? I mean, you're obviously being courted by a few teams at this particular time.
Yeah, my plan is to be obviously racing in Formula 1 next year, and at the moment it's not quite clear where I'm going to be, but that's the other reason why I'm here. It's a good time to negotiate with each one of the team managers that will talk to me and let me in the garage, and hopefully I'll be able to have a clearer situation sometime in the near future.
It's 10 years. We're celebrating 10 years of Adelaide, your first trip here to Adelaide. I'm just wondering what you were doing 10 years ago.
This time 10 years ago I was probably racing somewhere in Scotland in go-karts, so it's probably wet and horrible, quite similar to what we have here today.
And at school?
Yeah, at school. I was at secondary school and avoiding working as much as possible.
And still doing it?
I'm still doing it. That's why I'm in racing.
Yeah, that's why he's a racing driver.
I took Jackie's advice early on.
David drove for us, Paul Stewart Racing, for 3 years of his career. David, you're sitting on the sideline, but you're obviously in the inside line. Nigel's come back even stronger than I think anyone anticipated to get pole position here. What's your view of that in relationship to his comeback?
Well, I always thought that his best performance would be at this circuit, because this is exactly the sort of track that Nigel would excel on, and especially in comparison to Damon, which is the only real comparison you have with any of the drivers is against his teammate, because he has an equal car. And, I think that just going back to earlier in my career in Canada, I had a very good performance relative to Damon, which is kind of a street circuit there as well. And I think this is a circuit where, although Damon had fastest lap here last year, I think that fastest laps don't mean as much as the pole positions, because I've had a couple of fastest laps this year.
Well, what's it say, Jackie, about the present drivers, that somebody like Nigel can come back after a couple of years and with limited practice, limited conditioning, and get in there and be very, very competitive? Does that mean that, the gap, say, the Senna left is just a huge chasm?
Well, I think for me, I think really Schumacher's taken over the mantle of Senna, but keep in mind that wouldn't have happened without the miss of Alan Prost from racing his retirement, and of course the death of Ayrton Senna.
Okay, well, David, all the best. I hope you sign a multi-million-dollar contract and you're racing with a good team next year.
Thank you very much.
And Jackie's your manager, Mr. 25%?
I wish it was. It's 35.
Oh, 35%. Oh, yeah, typical. We will be back in Adelaide right after this break.